Hello. So here I have a couple slides for you about identity and film. And so at this stage of the class, we're talking more about applying the concepts that we've covered before instead of introducing new concepts. So there will be a few new things here, but I'm also going to give you some examples, some little like clips from movies, and talk about the identity theories, concepts that we've covered that we can see in those clips. So first, a lot of this is going to be practical things that you already know just from existing in a world that has film, right? So, researcher Gauntlet has suggested that media helps us construct our identity. I think we've already started to touch on that in the class. But so, film specifically provides access to new types of people, new places, new ideas. So, you might be living in small town USA, but you watch a movie from France or from Japan, and you're starting to develop potentially new awareness, new interest in these different cultures. And so that's how it can kind of help us shape identity outside of what we're already getting from our familiar structures or from the different institutions that we're involved in directly at home. And so film is very accessible, right? It's, when I was in school, the teacher didn't have a lesson plan or we had a substitute. A lot of times they'd wheel in the TV and we'd watch some random movie. A lot of times, even in MDS classes, we assign films as assignments for school. So you're getting it from that sort of perspective, but then also you put on the TV and there's a random movie. Netflix, all of these different things, we have access to films in ways that, we didn't used to before. And then through these different films, because you're seeing different extremes usually, like there aren't a lot of movies that are just about everyday life with nothing exciting happening. Usually there's some kind of big dramatic element to it or some, funny, humorous piece. But so through those, we're seeing through people's different lenses lots of different life circumstances that maybe we're not living directly. And so through that, we're developing our empathy. Also, people, why we don't have films about random everyday things is because that wouldn't make any money. So, also, the things that we're seeing through all of these films that are so accessible to us are things that people have decided are going to make them money. So, we do get a more distorted view of things maybe then. So, you remember a couple years ago when the Hunger Games movies came out? And then how many other dystopian young adult things came out after that? So we were watching all these sorts of movies because the Hunger Games made a lot of money, and now Hunger Games is apparently back again. I don't even know. But so, dystopian US became a popular theme, and so we saw that in a lot of different places. It was popular on TV as well with like The Walking Dead. And so you can postulate on how that might have bled over to influence our society, right? So that idea that, there's this dystopian reality. Handmaid's Tale is another kind of example of that has definitely made people view our current political state in different ways, right? So you might take a harsher view of what's happening in real life because of what you're seeing in these films that you think maybe has parallels with what's happening in that reality. And so I've talked so many times about identity being connected to time. Another example. So we watch a movie like Now and Then. Maybe you've seen that. It's a movie that came out in the 90s about growing up in the 60s. And so, you're seeing that kind of glorified version of what the 60s were like through that 90s lens in the 90s, thinking that the 60s were more, romantic or just a more peaceful time or whatever it is. But then in reality, you know, not so much. The 60s weren't really more peaceful than the 90s. We always have conflict. We always have issues going around. But so film stays stagnant once it's released, right? Like they aren't going back and editing these things over time to update them for today. That's why we see lots of things like being canceled, right? Because something that was acceptable in that time period is no longer acceptable. So they give us a good insight into what things were like in that time and understanding, hopefully, how people of that time had their identities, right? Like, why were they developed in that way? Why was it okay for somebody to have that identity at that time? So, a couple of the key concepts here are going to be on this slide. So, first, we have Mulvey's idea of the male gaze, which essentially suggests that men are in control of the implements that record film. And so through that, they are able to objectify women, and that it was almost like the default of film. Like women on film existed, they were put there to be objectified. Like their value was to be pretty on the screen. And so men's views of women impact how they're portrayed, how they're actually recorded onto the film, what angles they're recorded at, what sorts of things they're zooming in on, the way that they're dressed or have their makeup done or whatever it is for the actual recording process. And so because of this, and because of men having the control there, the male gaze concept says that women are denied a realistic representation. And so instead of being actively involved in the process, they're just like a passive object that's put in there to be enjoyed by the viewer. And so this creates kind of a false idea of what women should actually be like in reality. So if you're seeing kind of that like idealized, probably this reference isn't going to work, but Leave It to Beaver, like mother type situation where it's, doing the typical like wifely duties, homemaking, those sorts of things, suggesting that that's how women are supposed to be. And so because we use this sort of media to develop our identities, the option or opportunity for identity development in women is going to be limited by how they're represented on film. And so because of all of that, theoretically, it's damaging people. So it's damaging young girls because they're not having a wide range of possible identities shown for them through their media. And then it's negatively impacting young men because they're seeing this is how a woman is supposed to be. And so they grow up to expect that the women in their lives will replicate those sorts of things that they're seeing through film. So clearly you can see here, this is from 1975. I think this is not necessarily a timely complete theory for today. I think there are some differences. We do see female directors and directors of photography, people who are more involved in the film industry than they would have been in the 70s. But I think there's something to take away from this when we think about how has it all evolved? What does it kind of mean, big picture, and how does it continue to have influence? And so connected to this whole idea of women in film is the Bechdel test. So maybe you've heard of this before, but it basically just says that for anything to pass this test, you have to have a scene or ideally an entire story that has at least two women, and two women who are big enough parts in the film to actually have names and to be important characters. The plot is revolving around them. And so they will talk to each other in it. So a lot of times you'll see multiple female characters, but they're not actually interacting with each other. They're interacting with the other men. So two women with names, important roles, speaking to each other. And then the key piece is speaking to each other about something other than a man. So you'll see like a lot of romantic comedies that will have two, main character females, but a lot of times they're talking about the drama from the man, right? So this is something where relationships largely are not involved in it at all. So a woman isn't kind of relegated to having significance based on her role connected to a man who is a main character. So two women who, have a story between themselves, amongst themselves, without having a man have to have an important role or to be some sort of like mediator between it. So try to think if you can think of any movies that actually would pass this test. If we were in a live classroom environment, we would spend a couple minutes doing that and then share examples. A lot of times you can get through the first two, but then there's going to be lots of discussion about men. Or they will be women who are doing things that are, important. They'll have important roles, like maybe a specific job within the movie that's important, but then they don't actually interact at all. So it's trickier getting the three, and then getting the three in a really kind of meaningful way. And so again, this is something where there's been a lot more specific effort to have things that will pass this test in the past, I'd say probably like 10 years. So if you're looking for examples from the 90s or earlier, it's going to be a lot harder than if you're looking for examples in the past 5 years. So think about that too when you come up with your examples. Are they newer, or can you think of something from the 80s that would actually pass this test? So those are kind of the key new concepts related to film and identity that I want to cover. And now we're going to go into a couple clips that I want you to watch. And
life-saving! Now, I know we're all top-notch little swimmers, but now we get to show our stuff and earn those certificates! Hey, how about our first little pair of life-saving buddies? Amanda, Wednesday?
Is that your bathing suit? Is that your overbite?
Now, one of you will be the drowning victim, and the other one gets to be our lifesaver.
I'll be the victim all your life. I'm going to be an actress.
Brava! Now, Amanda, jump in. Swim out a few yards and start drowning.
Help me! Help me! I'm drowning! Help me! I'm dying! I can't swim.
So hopefully you've all seen that movie before. If not, please go watch the Addams Family movies. They are glorious, magnificent productions. So in that clip, there are a couple things that I've kind of highlighted on the screen that I saw that connected to our key concepts so far. There's plenty more that I'm not going to talk about here, so I want you to think about that, get used to applying them. So one, with social identity theory, we very much see the in-group and out-group, right? So both with Wednesday and Pugsley, hopefully you know who those are, but they were the two kids wearing the black, their brothers, or brother and sister. And so you can see all the other kids there wearing bright colors. You know, they look modern, whereas the swimming outfits that Pugsley and Wednesday are wearing are a little bit more old-fashioned. So we very much see the in-group and out-group aspect. And then we see with Wednesday, she's very much okay not being in the in-group, right? Like, she intentionally tries to be in the out-group through everything. And we see that in every representation of Wednesday, made in modernity, like, you know, in like the new show that came out this year, last year, whenever it was on Netflix. You can see it again there. And so then we also see, if we're thinking about uncertainty reduction theory, we see some uncertainty about behavior and cognition too, but specifically with behavioral uncertainty, you know, the camp counselor, maybe we should have asked them questions before this to try to limit that behavioral uncertainty. And so from this point on, he's always going to be wondering, okay, wait, is this person going to be able to swim? Right? So it's like a different kind of take on the concept, but it still connects there. Micro-invalidation, when she says she'll, you know, be a victim, and Wednesday says for the rest of her life, she's making certain judgments about the character of her classmate there, right? Wednesday is saying, okay, this peppy blonde girl is going to be a victim forever because she's never going to stand up for herself. She's not going to be strong enough like Wednesday is, right? She's thinking about her in comparison to herself. So you definitely see the micro-invalidation there. And so with that, that's actually a different way to look at micro-invalidation, because the peppy blonde white girl probably is not being held down in many aspects of her life, right? Like, she is not a member of a group that's suffering, but this still is an invalidation of her character. So there are definitely times when people have biases against blondes, right? So it's not as extreme, it's not as impactful as a lot of the other biases that we see in our society, but it does still count. It still has an impact. And then optimal distinctiveness theory, of course, we can see how that fits in with Wednesday, right?
Rather. Now, one of your interests is the theatre. Tell us about that.
I'm keen on acting. You know, I've done various parts.
Can I stop you? Don't mention the theatre.
Well, it's what I'm interested in.
Well, then soft pedal it, the acting side of it anyway. Most dons think the theatre's a waste of time.
Music is all right, though, isn't it, sir? They don't frown on that.
No, you should just say what you enjoy.
Mozart?
No, everybody likes Mozart. Somebody more off the beaten track. Tippett, say, or Bruckner.
But I don't know them.
May I make a silly suggestion? Why can they not all just tell the truth?
I hesitate to mention this, lest it occasion a sophisticated groan. But it may not have crossed your minds, but one of the dons who interviews you may be a woman. I'm reluctant at this stage in the game to expose you to new ideas, but having taught you all history on a strictly non-gender orientated basis, I just wonder whether it occurs to any of you how dispiriting this can be. Am I embarrassing you?
A bit, miss. It's not our fault, it's just the way it is. The world is everything that is the case, miss. It's Wittgenstein, miss.
Yes, I know it's Wittgenstein, thank you. Can you for a moment imagine how depressing it is to teach 5 centuries of masculine ineptitude?
Oh.
Why do you think there are no women historians on TV?
No tits.
Hit that boy! Hit it!
Sir, you can't, sir!
I'll tell you why. Because history's not such a frolic for women as it is for men. Why should it be? They never get round the conference table. In 1919, for instance, they just arranged the flowers, then gracefully retired. History is a commentary on the various and continuing incapabilities of men. What is history? History is women following behind with the bucket.
Raj.
Now, how do you define history, Mr. Raj?
Can I speak freely, miss? Without being hit.
I will protect you.
How do I define history? It's just one fucking thing after another.
I see. And why do you want to come to Christchurch?
It's the one I thought I might get into.
No other reason.
Do you like the architecture, for instance?
Well, they'll ask me about sport, wouldn't they?
If you're as uncommunicative as this, they may be forced to.
Okay, so that was a clip from The History Boys, which, again, if you haven't seen it, I very highly recommend. It's a movie about a play, actually. The play came first for several years. But it's about a group of boys who do well in a grammar school, which is like a high-achieving high school, essentially. And so they finished high school, but they stay to do extra classes to prepare them so they'll look better when they go to interview for places at Oxbridge, so Cambridge, Oxford. So they're interviewing at the different colleges at those universities to try to get in. And so the school's really invested in them studying extra because it looks better for that high school if they get students into Oxbridge, right? So within this, there's lots of different things that we see there. But again, I've highlighted a couple of the key things. So there's, again, that idea that we kind of started with the conscientious Zhao, like being part of a system, but then realizing that you're going through the motions. And you can see in the reactions from a couple of those boys in there that they're starting to realize that they're just part of the system, right? They're not getting active roles in their decision making. They're just doing what people expect them to do. And so within that, we see multiple identities, right? So there's the one who wants to talk about his different composers, one who wants to talk about his sport because that's what he actually cares about. But instead, he's being made to talk about these other things that maybe feel better, or they fit into this kind of idea of upper class British society better than sport. Uncertainty reduction, so we see that with the interactions between the students and the teachers, of course, with the hitting. And so, do the answers you give, are they changed because you're afraid of somebody hitting you upside the head with a large book, or you're afraid of your teacher hitting you, right? So again, we talked before about things being canceled. That's probably not happening in the schools that you guys went to recently, right? Teachers probably aren't threatening you. So it shows again, like a snapshot in time. And then we see a lot of impression management in there, right? Like that's basically the whole point. So there's the one who wants to talk about I think he said Mozart, right? And they're like, no, don't talk about Mozart. Everybody talks about Mozart. Talk about these more niche, different composers. And so that also is kind of bringing in that optimal distinctiveness theory, right? So you want to be able to talk about music, that's great, you're in that bigger group, but then within that bigger group you're setting yourself apart and saying that you can talk about lesser known composers. And so that would seem to the people interviewing you at the college that you're a more well-versed person, you've had more of a holistic education, you're also more of an upper class individual because you're more informed about these really niche thing. We think of music like that as being something for the higher classes, and so you're more informed of that, so you're probably more schooled in that segment of society. And we see exemplification, right? They're actually, even just the act that they're sitting there doing this one day, rehearsing how they're going to interview, they're really trying to engage in the self-promotion there. So hopefully you can see that. Again, like I said, there's definitely more you can think of an example for each of the things that we've kind of covered so far in the class in that clip. But so I also want you to kind of do this with a movie that you're familiar with. So I've given you clips that are things that I'm interested in. I'm sure a lot of you have absolutely no interest in the Addams Family or the History Boys. So try to think about a clip from a movie that you do like. What can you pull from that that relates to the key concepts that we've covered so far in this course?